To meet the Carolina colony's labor demands, the Lord's proprietors decided to rely on two unfree systems: indentured servitude and race-based slavery. Both systems were relatively new to the English Atlantic world and were directly tied to England's efforts to expand its empire through colonization. As a form of contract labor, indentured servitude first appeared in Virginia in the early 17th century. After some refinements, this novel arrangement allowed Europeans who wanted to immigrate to the colonies but could not afford the transportation costs to sell their labor and bind themselves temporarily to persons of greater means in exchange for their tickets to the New World. Typically, the servant would also receive housing, food, and clothing from his or her legal superior. Virginia in 1619 was also the first English colony to acquire enslaved Africans. Although slavery was slow to develop in the Chesapeake region, it grew more quickly in the English West Indies, especially on the island of Barbados. Colonized in 1627, Barbados experienced an economic boom in the 1640s that was based first on mixed exports and then almost exclusively on sugar. The skyrocketing demand for labor led Barbadian planters to import thousands of enslaved Africans. By 1670, the island's population numbered about 63,000 inhabitants, with people of African descent outnumbering Europeans by nearly a 2-to-1 ratio. After the Carolina colony was chartered in 1663, the first overseas interest in settling there came from Barbados. Few opportunities remained on the overcrowded island, and many English colonists were leaving. Those who wanted to immigrate to Carolina also insisted on bringing slavery to the new province. Toward that end, they sought guarantees from the proprietors, who in turn decreed that free colonists would have absolute power and authority over the Africans that they enslaved in Carolina. Indentured servitude and race-based slavery differed in several important ways. First, indentured servitude was largely voluntary. Although there were abuses to the system, individuals generally chose to become servants and agreed to the terms of their contracts. The overwhelming majority of indentured servants were white Europeans. Slavery, on the other hand, was not a choice. It was involuntary, forced upon Africans by Europeans. Second, indentured servants labored for a specified period of time, anywhere from 2 to 7 years, depending on the time and place, with the average Carolina indenture lasting 3.5 years. Enslaved people, however, were compelled to toil for life. Race-based slavery was also a hereditary system, meaning that the children of enslaved people would suffer the same fate as their parents. Lastly, indentured servants had rights, whereas enslaved Africans did not. And indentured servants' rights were spelled out in a legal contract known as an indenture. It got this name because it was written in duplicate on the same page, and then the document was indented or cut in two along a unique zigzagging line so that the contract could be authenticated by matching the cut edges. When the first fleet sailed from England in August 1669, most of the colonists on board the flagship Carolina were indentured servants. At least 3 enslaved Africans, who were likely a family, also arrived with the first fleet. We do not know their African names, only the English ones imposed upon them: John, Elizabeth, and John Jr. 1 year after the founding of Charles Towne, about 30 enslaved people were toiling in the new settlement. By the time that the capital was moved across the Ashley River a decade later, their number had increased to 200, out of a total population of 1,200 inhabitants. While indentured servants made up the majority of unfree laborers in Carolina's early years, a sharp decline in servant migration prompted planters to increase their imports of enslaved Africans to meet the growing demand. By the 1690s, slavery had surpassed indentured servitude as the colony's primary labor system.